One-on-One. In part 2, we will talk about complex and compound complex sentences. In order to make a complex sentence, you will need only one IC, one independent clause, and one or more dependent clauses, DC. What is a dependent clause? If you remember from part 1, in order to make a clause, you will need a subject and a verb. When you add a subordinator to a subject and a verb, you make a dependent clause. Here's a list of some subordinators: if, when, while, even though, although, who, what, which, that, because, etc. The punctuation in complex sentences is pretty easy. If you begin a sentence with a dependent clause, like in this example, as soon as I finish reading, you put a comma, and you continue with an independent clause. I will start writing. If you begin a sentence with an independent clause, there is no punctuation before the DC. John enjoys traveling, even though he is always out of money. Even though there is a little pause here, there is no comma. John enjoys traveling, even though he is always out of money. That's why you never put a comma before because, unlike when you used fanboys for. Remember compound sentences where for means the same as because, but grammatically I said they're different. You put a comma before for, but you do not put a comma before because because is a subordinator. So every time you have a subordinator in the middle of the sentence, there's no comma. John enjoys traveling, even though he is always out of money when he comes back from a trip. Here you have one independent clause and two dependent clauses with no punctuation. When you are dealing with dependent clauses, there is a chance of a fragment. It's a common error within complex sentences. A fragment is when you use only one dependent clause with a period and no independent clause. So when you begin your sentence with a subordinator, and then you add subject and a verb, and then you put a period. So usually when your dependent clause is long, you believe that you finish your thought and you put a period. However, if you do not have an IC, you're creating a fragment. For example, when I was little, that's a fragment, because you begin your sentence with a subordinator, subject and a verb, and you don't continue with another IC. Now, the easiest way to fix this problem is to eliminate the subordinator. Once you eliminate the subordinator, what you have left is an IC. And it's a pretty simple sentence. I was little. It's a correct sentence. Or you can make a complex sentence by adding an IC. When I was little, comma, I wanted to be a pirate. Let's look at another example. When I was little and I wanted to be a pirate. You begin your sentence with when, and you have two independent clauses here, connected only by when. It's a DC. Now, again, the easiest way to fix this, you eliminate when, and you put a comma before fanboys. I was little, comma, and I wanted to be a pirate. Or you can add an independent clause. When I was little and wanted to be a pirate, comma, my parents took me to Disney. And the last type is compound complex. Compound complex sentences require at least two independent clauses and one dependent clause. And if you recognize this formula, IC plus IC, that's a compound sentence. And this is a formula, IC-DC. This formula belongs to the complex sentences. So together they make a compound complex sentence. When I was little, I wanted to be a pirate, so my parents took me to Disney for my birthday, which was one of the unforgettable days in my life. There are four clauses. We begin with the dependent clause, subordinator when I was little, and then you have two independent clauses connected by a comma and so, fanboys so. I wanted to be a pirate, so my parents took me to Disney for my birthday. and then you finish your sentence with a DC, subordinator which, and the verb, which was one of the unforgettable days in my life. Now, this is a summary of all 4 types of sentences. It gives you formulas, how to make a sentence, and it gives you different ways you can punctuate clauses, dependent clauses and independent clauses, and it also tells you how to avoid some mistakes in each type of sentence. And on the second slide of this summary, you see complex sentences, and you have 3 types of dependent clauses with complex sentences and compound complex sentence. Again, you have the formula and punctuation. When it comes to the punctuation of compound complex sentences, you use the same punctuation as you use for complex sentences and compound sentences. How do you punctuate 2 independent clauses? It's the same way as you punctuate compound sentences. How do you punctuate independent clause with a dependent clause? It's the same as you do with complex sentences.